Hey, what's going on, guys? I got something pretty heavy to talk about today. Now, if you're like me, you're a huge fan of Berserk. When Studio Eclipse released their trailer for the Berserk Black Swordsman arc, I was pretty damn hyped. I'm not gonna lie. In fact, many of us were hyped. In the last 4 months alone, the trailer has already attained over 4 million views on YouTube. And the animation looked very good. It looked like we were actually gonna get what we always wanted. A properly adapted version of Berserk. Not only that, chapters that we've never seen animated before. But this all came to a crashing halt on September 10th, when the official Berserk Twitter account let it be known that they had not given their permission for the production of this project. They rightfully said that Studio Gaga is the rightful copyright holder, and that the videos being made are being displayed without permission. Now, a lot of us chalk this up to, well, that's the end of the project, it was a nice idea, but, rules are rules, we have to abide by them. But it's come to my attention that there was something deeper about this whole story. Not only was it being done without the permission of the copyright holder, but there were other intentions as well. Intentions that included monetary gain without being completely upfront about what they were doing. Now, before we get into that, I just want to mention one other thing. Studio Taka saw the news about what happened. They decided to pull out from making any more episodes. And I quote, "After thoughtful consideration and exploring all possible options, we have made the difficult decision to bring this project to a close. While we are extremely passionate about continuing the project, we recognize the potential legal risk involved and feel that it's important to respect the intellectual property rights of Studio Gaga/Hakusensha. And this is a very reasonable course of action. I'm sure they would love to continue the project, but given what's happened, they feel like this is for the best." Studio Eclipse, on the other hand, the studio that was being targeted by Hakusensha and Studio Gaga, has taken no such action. In fact, they've gone zero dark 30 for the last 2 weeks, which seems a little bit peculiar. You would think that some word would come out by now. Well, it seems like a lot of the information regarding Studio Eclipse and how they were going about their business affairs have been revealed. And it's all thanks to one man on Twitter called Logic Knight. Now, he is upfront in saying that this thread is not intended to harass or encourage harassment, but to shed light on the issues that have been hidden from the public for years. The goal is to hold core management accountable, not to direct personal attacks. And with that said, let's get right into it. Now, he makes the distinction at first that Studio Eclipse, previously known as Shingeki no Requiem, is a separate team from AOT no Requiem. So obviously it goes without saying, don't direct any hate towards them. This is all Shingeki no Requiem, who was later renamed as Studio Eclipse. Now, Eclipse, aka Shingeki no Requiem, started off as a non-profit passion project to adapt AOT no Requiem by its first co-founder. Now, even though they amassed 200 passionate members to work on the project, it seemed like the leadership's ambition slowly strayed away from the project's original vision. Now, you can see right here on their official account of the 100% non-profit fan animation project, adapting AOT no Requiem. Now, these are conversations provided by Logic Knight by the alleged members of Studio Eclipse. Now, in one conversation, they were talking about copyright and how it works. This member stated that any and all forms of art imitation that is direct in nature is illegal by law. However, if this unspoken rule of law was taken into account, all forms of artwork and their owners would be in jail. Copyright is a very vague system because it is very difficult to describe what is copyrighted and what is not. Essentially, it gives power to the people who own the IP to decide what they wish to do with it. So in regards to the AOT project, he says, how does this connect to us? See, if Kodansha sees our project and sees that we're doing this in a negative light because of the hate comments comparing us to Mappa and others saying that we're disrespecting Isayama, then they can easily take down the entire fucking episode. And they won't even get a bad rep. He goes on to say, if we ask for donations here, even slightly for SNR, Shingeki no Requiem, it will be disastrous for us and open up so many complications. Like I already told you guys, the money that we get for other projects, we can use for hiring compositors for SNR. We don't even have to tell people that we're using this money for SNR. We can say that we're using it for CMS animation, i.e. Chainsaw Man animation. We are not even linking SNR to money, and that is final. Like, there cannot even be a discussion on it. Right now, we can start a new account for Studio Eclipse. Start fresh, start new, completely separate from SNR, and we can have that have a Patreon and all. So essentially what's going on here is that they were going to use the money from Studio Eclipse, i.e. the Berserk money, for their AOT project. Or at least that's what they were purporting to do. Now, in their disclaimer for their AOT project, they said that they were not going to use it for any monetary gain. In quote, Shingeki no Requiem does not intend to make any monetary gain off of the content, and guarantees to remain 100% non-profit. However, that was later removed. In a correspondence with Axel, who seems to be one of the managers for the studio, although I'm not completely sure, he's asked by one of the members about the not-for-profit's message in the disclaimer. But Axel responds with, yeah, but I don't think we should have it. It won't make sense to put out this message, and 1 month later, say we are opening Patreon. Now later on, Esther writes a message about transparency. He wants someone to be in charge of the bookkeeping and accounting. And he states, I've seen many of projects get destroyed because one person ran away with all the money, or embezzled the funds without the knowledge of the others. Huh, interesting thing to say there. Now before going on with any public projects, they decided to make a poll to see where the temperature of the audience was. And it was decided by the audience that they wanted to see Berserk animated in some format. And with this, fans were promised that the funds were going to go towards a Berserk project. Now, despite working on AOT no Requiem's adaptation for 3 years, they made very little progress, and ended up settling on adapting only a single chapter. They decided to focus their efforts elsewhere and start working on Berserk. But this is where things get really juicy, because the voice actor for Guts came forward to confirm that no major hires have been made for Berserk in ages. In fact, he said that the project was as good as dead, not even taking the copyright issue into account. Now, the project started off as a very ambitious idea, but production stopped really soon after the trailer. Only the voice actor of Guts and one other guy are keeping the project afloat since May of this year. All the directors and animators decided to leave, but yet they're still collecting money from the unassuming patrons. It goes on to say that one thing I forgot to mention is that collecting the money was intended for hiring new staff members, like animators, sound designers, storyboard artists, etc. But since they haven't hired anyone since May, this money is going into the pockets of the so-called director. In Logic Knight's next post, he writes, P.S. on the quote-unquote Ponzi scheme. Eclipse Studio staff, i.e. new investors, are recruited to create content, with the promise of payment and exposure. Their work attracts more Patreon supporters, i.e. old investors, who are given incomplete content while being promised something greater. In the next post, he writes, instead of delivering on the Berserk project, the studio uses funds from new patrons to keep the cycle going, attracting more artists and patrons to sustain other projects. As new artists bring in more supporters, the scheme continues with no real progress on Berserk. He then writes, this is evident when you compare the works of said artist individually compared to their studio work / contributions for Berserk. One good example is Mark Raymer, who is well known in the Berserk community for his spectacular indie animations. Yet this is how he's being utilized and publicized for compositing for the AOT no Requiem adaptation, while being underutilized for additional compositing for Berserk. And that's about all the information that Logic Knight presented. Now, of course, this is my only source, so I cannot say that this is 100% accurate. That being said, there are some red flags with Studio Eclipse. The fact that they've been working on the AOT project for 3 years is a bit concerning, especially given the fact that there's very little to no progress. And the promises that were given for Berserk were very lofty, to say the least. It's very possible that the studio just created that 3-minute animation and literally had no plans of doing anything else. As the voice actor for Guts said, it seems like the team basically disbanded after May. And there just doesn't seem to be a lot of transparency with the studio as well. The fact that Studio Taka decided to make the decision that they made by forgoing future content and making it public, while Studio Eclipse has gone 0 Dark 30 and hasn't said a thing, is very troubling. You would think that they would make their intentions known more clearly, but the real troubling evidence is that they took Patreon donations and were using it for other projects. And it's very likely that they were just going to continue making these 3-minute animations of various anime, whether it be Fire Punch or Chainsaw Man or AOT or whatever it was. Get the audience hyped up and then disregard it to move on to something else. So I know a lot of us were excited about this project. I mean, it did look really good, I'm not gonna lie. But at the same time, maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Studio Gaga unintentionally shed some light on Studio Eclipse that I don't believe they ever thought would be shed. Not only is this project dead in the water, but now we have to look at future projects with a bit more scrutiny. And I'm sure animators have to be a little more careful about this as well going forward. One of the rippling effects is that Studio Taka decided to stop animating themselves. And I'm sure there's other animators that wanted to work on projects like this or short little snippets and probably have to rethink that going forward in the future. But anyway, guys, I don't want to draw any conclusions for you. I just wanted to present the information that is out there. Of course, make your own judgments on the matter. But if you liked this video, if you thought it was informative, if you enjoyed yourself, I would appreciate it if you subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later.